Welcome to everybody to another edition of Moya Talks. We close and wrap up our design and economic opportunities series with Menkiti, founder and CEO of the Menkiti Group. Uh, Menkiti is the founder and CEO of the Menkiti Group, a real estate service company dedicated to transforming lives, career, and communities through real estate. The Menkiti Group is focused on strengthening neighborhoods through the strategic development, management, and disposition of real estate in urban markets. Bo also serves as the CEO and is the founding partner of Keller Williams Capital Property, KWCP, a residential estate brokerage managed by the Menkiti Group. Most recently, Bo founded Mission Mortgage, a double bottom line regional mortgage lender. Welcome, Bo. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Okay, so first question. Bua Benite, friend of yours, once mentioned that you are a great storyteller. And after having seen you during a couple of public presentations, I must agree. Where did you hone your oratory skills, Annabelle?
Oh man. Well, you know, when I think about storytelling, I'll tell you two things that really shape or resonate with me around stories. So the first is my father. My father immigrated to the United States from Nigeria, and like every good immigrant, just kept going to school and going to school and going to school to make a life for himself. He was a philosophy professor at Wellesley College, but his passion was poetry, and so I was exposed at a young age to my father's love of language and of words. It wasn't something that I actually really appreciated until the past few years. My father passed away about 2 years ago, but about a year before he passed away, he had a stroke. And the stroke affected the part of his brain that had to do with language. And so it was a fascinating experience for me as a child and a caregiver and a supporter to see someone whose life had been about words struggle with the exercise of communicating. So I do believe that I have to give my father the credit for the passion about language and quotes. So since I was very young, I loved quotes. So I'm always up for a good quote and trying to find a good quote. And actually one of the most fun things that I had to do, one of our team members, Katie Heaton, enrolled my dad and I in this story course. So NPR did this thing where they go around the country and you get to interview someone. And so one of the most gratifying things I did was I got to interview my dad only a few months before he passed away. And hearing that interview has been a real fun thing. Second thing though about story that I think is really important is that I had an opportunity before I got into real estate to work in an organization called College Summit. And College Summit worked with low-income, first-generation high school students who were trying to go to college, who wanted to go to college. It would be the first in their families to go to college. And what College Summit did was we ran workshops in the summers on college campuses where we'd bring students between their junior and senior year to college campuses. And the idea, College Summit's tagline was, let talent shine, let talent shine. How do we identify the young people with potential in this country who may not actually fully see that potential and may not know how to navigate the system to fully tap in and harness the power of their potential? And the fundamental element of College Summit was a writing workshop for these high school juniors to write their college application essay. And what we found, I was at College Summit for a number of years, and it grew to serve about 12,000 young people around the country. What we found was the power of story. The power of story, not just in how you communicate to others, but in how you see yourself. And this idea that every day, right, every day we have experiences, and how we filter those experiences create a way in which we see ourselves. And every day we place ourselves as a character, as a narrative in a story. And the story we tell ourselves about ourselves is one of the most powerful things that we have as individuals to shape our future. And the story that we learn to tell of ourselves to others is one of the most powerful things we can do. So it was amazing for me to see these young people who often thought of themselves as, not college material, not cut out for that, because they said, hey, well, I didn't come from this background, or I didn't have these grades. And the writing process at College Summit was about finding your strengths, helping young people find what they had to contribute. Maybe you weren't a straight A student, but maybe you helped raise your sibling. Maybe every day you held down a job. How do you tell the story of your power? And I was fascinated by it back then. I've been fascinated ever since then, because in the world of community development, I believe that the key to creating equitable and sustainable community development is to harness the power of a community in telling the story of what it has to offer.
Well, you just answered my second question with that. It's fascinating what you say about subjectivity and telling stories, right? Judith Butler would say that the first ethical commitment that you have is to give an account of yourself. And you tell that story to yourself, and then you tell that story to other people. Could you be more specific of how you use storytelling for community development to change the culture of real estate in the district?
Yeah, so I use another analogy. The one I always think of when I think about real estate development is that oftentimes we think about, especially in urban communities where there's an existing fabric and buildings and people and culture, oftentimes development is thought of as sort of, you take a blank slate, you have a white canvas, and let's go paint something, right? And so as creative, the creative part of development oftentimes starts with an assumption that there's a site, and the site is constrained by some, zoning codes or whatever, and so we have the boundaries of our site, right? So the site's bounded by the physical components and maybe some regulatory components. And most designers and developers, we start with this idea that we're painting a painting on a blank canvas, and we become very project focused. So we have a site and we design a project, but people don't live in a project. Communities don't exist in a project. They exist in context. And so I've always said that the exercise of community development is painting on a half-painted canvas. And that the skill of community development is figuring out how what you add, what you can contribute, the new texture or color that you can add to that canvas, how does it highlight? How does it enhance? How does it pull forward what's already there? And so in my mind, too often in community development, we focus on what's missing in communities, and we see ourselves as, sort of coming in to provide what's missing. And too often do we look at the assets that already exist in a community, especially communities that have historically been seen as disenfranchised or challenged. We don't stop to say, what is the great culture that exists? What is the history, right? What is the architecture that's already existing? What's the so I think this idea of how, like if you think of the history, you think of history of like oral traditions, if you go back to storytelling, right? They exist within a tradition, and it's stories that build on other stories. And so when we have the opportunity to do community development, we have an opportunity to tell a story, but that story is not in isolation of the stories that existed before and that exist next to it. And so how do we start to think about community development as something that complements and is synergistic with what is in a community? And to do that, you have to actually see assets in the community. And one of my biggest frustrations that I know some of the people on your team have heard on some of our content is that oftentimes from a policy standpoint or from an approach standpoint, we look at under-resourced communities as not having assets. And we don't acknowledge and appreciate and highlight the strength that does exist in our communities.
I'm guessing that this informs a lot of the work you do to promote small businesses and retail opportunities in communities, right? Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I had an experience that helped crystallize this a little bit for me. I was had the opportunity to, I was touring around Wynwood Walls with Jessica Goldman, and she was talking about her father who just passed away, and she was telling me how in the early days when they were acquiring property in these neighborhoods, her father was very adamant about not buying certain buildings. And so I asked her about, so why, you guys have quietly assembled this whole neighborhood. Why did you not buy that building or that building? And the response inevitably every time as we walked through these streets was because there was an existing business there that was contributing to the community. And if we just bought everything, we would destroy the authenticity and the strength of the community, it really struck me that, not that from a retail standpoint, oftentimes it's what's going on in the retail on that first level that shapes the culture. And so our company has always said that great cities are made up of great neighborhoods, and that great neighborhoods have three things in common. They have mixed income housing. So they have people from different backgrounds living together, right? They have thriving commercial corridors where there are small businesses that create a unique and authentic sense of place there, and that hire local people and create jobs and economic development. And then finally, they have some sort of vibrant culture, whether that's arts or entertainment or sports, or there's something that identifies it, right? So it's my belief that when we think about retail, we oftentimes think about it in isolation. We do void studies, and we figure out, what's the missing product that people need, all of which is important. But oftentimes we fail to capture the strength of the existing entrepreneurs in the community, and to highlight that effectively, and to augment the authentic sense of place that's already been created. So my sense has been, no matter where you go in America, no matter how distressed the neighborhood, no matter how bleak you think the environment is, you can find an amazing business. You can find someone doing amazing things, oftentimes against great odds with very little resources. And if you can figure out how to magnify that or amplify that, that usually gets at and speaks to some of the heart of what that community is.
Right. So the Menkiti Group made history back in 2016, right? When you became the first small business that received funding for a property assessed clean energy for a project in Brooklyn. In your 17 years long experience with the Menkiti Group, what have been the biggest challenges?
Lots of challenges. I'm sure we've made lots of mistakes. I mean, I think I've always said that the key to success, involves these three P's. And the first one I've always said is that one has to be passionate about what one's doing. One has to believe in the mission. You have to believe in the purpose, right? And the reason why that's so important is because the second P is persistence. You have to be willing to get up. The only thing that's guaranteed is in this journey is that we're going to get knocked down, that we're going to fail, right? Success is not guaranteed, failure is. And so the question becomes, how committed are you to where you're trying to go that allows you to dust yourself off and get back up when you get knocked down? And then finally is the question of people, like who are you surrounded by? Who's around you? Who's lifted you up? And so when I think about some of the challenges, right, I think about that idea of passion, of persistence, and of people. Some of the biggest challenges I'd say is that we have, one of the biggest ones is more conceptual, is that we've always been on the front lines in the community. So we're accessible, people know where we are. And so oftentimes we absorb people's feelings about development. We were in Brooklyn, where there was a lot of conflict about development in the future, and how does this neighborhood evolve over time? And we were there. We were on 12th Street. You could walk in our office. You could talk to us. You could see us at the coffee shop. I remember I was taking my 2-year-old son to buy a cup of coffee, and two different people stop us in the coffee shop and they're having this very animated discussion about the future of development, and one's pro-development, one's anti-development, and my son's like, what's going on here? But this idea that when you go out, when you step into any space, oftentimes, especially if you're trying to bridge a space between different parties, you take more bullets, you take more arrows. And that has been one of the more challenging things, I think, as an organization that has been able to sit on both sides. You know, it started our first project, I'll never forget, on Sherman Avenue. My first project, we bought a 16-unit building that had a number of, lower income but working people in it. And this building had been neglected for years, it was in horrible shape. And idealistic little Bo said, oh, well, my gosh, we could do this co-op, and we could create ownership opportunities for all these people, and this would be amazing. And it works economically. And, so I walked in, little did I know that I was walking into a world where there was this deeply entrenched system of tenant organizing and developers. And so I remember sitting down with the executive director of the tenant organizing organization, and, trying to have this conversation about what we wanted to do, and it was just it was uncomprehendable to her that a developer would care about community. And so they only had one play to run, and that play was pay these people to go away. And it was actually the worst thing you could do for these people. You give them a few $1,000s to go away, and they can't find another affordable place, versus you turn them into a homeowner, same or lower price per month. But the system is set up with conflicts. We faced this even more recently in some of our work at Anacostia, where the assumption is, well, if you are a developer, you must not be invested in seeing Black and brown people from the community work. And so that's going to be the furthest thing from the truth about what we're committed to. But if there's only one play, people get really good at running the play. And so when you step out of the paradigm that exists, people don't know how to treat you. They don't know how to respond. So I know that's very conceptual, but that's a lot of the challenges we faced. The other one has just been one of the benefits that we had, is that we had a number of businesses that allowed us to sort of keep the lights on. So our ability to run the brokerage business, which was an ongoing sustainable business, allowed us to weather some of the ups and downs of development. It also allowed us to weather some of the inevitable challenges or practices you faced in terms of accessing capital. As a minority-owned company, a lot of the challenges to growth in a heavily capital-intensive business are, how do you access capital and how do you manage capital? And so for us, having the operating business and having the cash from the operating business allowed us to do things that were more community-minded, that folks maybe didn't want to fund, or that were seen as more risky on the development side. And that helped us grow. It was also some ways hindered us, because we got much bigger and went further along than we did without having really third-party relationships. One last thought just on this that you made me think of is this idea that oftentimes we did a little exercise in our company a few years back where we talked about how one's gift we said the gift is the curse and the curse is the gift. And oftentimes as individuals, we live and we grow up, back to the stories that we tell ourselves. We tell ourselves a story about something that we may see as a curse, And for me, I grew up a biracial child in Boston, in a not super diverse time in Boston. I was a 6'4", 250-pound Black kid playing ice hockey in New England, right? I lived in the city and I went to a elite prep school. I was every sort of mixed up, backwards thing you could possibly put together. And as a young person, I thought it was horrible. That was my curse. I was never going to fit in. Where was my community? Where was the place I felt safe, where I felt welcomed? I was always an outsider in every land that I went to. And as I got older, I started to see that maybe this thing that I thought was a curse was a gift. I had been trained to operate in many different worlds, to connect with and see people across many different spectrums. And when I started to get into the real estate world and realized that maybe one day we needed to be on the street corner talking with community members, or maybe figuring out how to deal with the folks who are sleeping on the site because they don't have a place to go. And then the next day we got to be talking to, some real estate private equity guy from New York and talking about, capital markets. That this idea to operate and to reach and bridge across different communities and different environments could actually be a gift, and might actually be, over the years, I think it's one of our core values, this bridge building in our company. It's one of our core values. And over the years, I think the story I've told myself about it has changed. And I was able to see what I saw as a curse, as a gift.
Okay, let's finish with one last question, and then we open the floor. You have the Legacy Community Partners development behind you. Mm-hmm. What's the story you want to tell with it?
Story. So in my mind, the story of Legacy Community Partners is grounded in history, right? And it's grounded in two different tracks of history. One is about U Street and the legacy of this community as a place of Black self-sufficiency and economic empowerment. If you go back all the way back in history, it's actually, go back to Shaw, is named after Colonel Bernard Shaw, and it's where the 54th Regiment, the first African-American regiment to fight in the Civil War, it's where they camped. But fast forward to the real piece. During the time of racial codes in DC and sundown laws, where sort of African-Americans were not allowed to be out after sundown, a lot of African-American businesses, really for protection, centered around Howard University. And that created a Black middle class and economic self-sufficiency around Howard. And it was that business self-sufficiency that gave birth to the creativity of jazz and arts that as sort of Black Broadway in the history of U Street. And so in many ways, I think the story of Legacy Community Partners is, and then you go fast forward to the Reeves Center, which was all about Marion Barry saying this city can do for itself. Mm-hmm. It can do and build for itself. We can use our resources, our government agencies, to make our city better. And so I think that Legacy Community Partners and our vision for Reeves is grounded in this idea that we have the assets within our community. We have the strength within our city. We have the capacity and the talent within our community to do and to build and to be better for our future, right? We don't need to look outside all the time to build what we can do. The second piece, I think, is in the history of the evolution of minority development in DC. And if you look back again to folks like Marion Barry, they early on insisted that, there was diversity in the teams that came in for projects. And that started an early, era of primarily consultants, right? Who would consult these teams, were usually more lobbyists, sort of political types, who helped and got an opportunity and sort of started to diversify development. That evolved into this world of emerging managers and some of the names today of Victor McFarland and Primo, who took advantage of pension funds and others wanting to diversify the way they distributed money. And those folks built more companies, but still were conduits for money that was determined by somebody else, right? And we stand on their shoulders. And then came, and each of these iterations is dependent on the first sacrifices of the earlier one, right? And so more recently, it's been this idea of what we grew up in was of, hey, we can have a set aside, 20% of this development should go to a CBE partner. And I think what we're trying to challenge, and not challenge in a way that says what was before was wrong, to challenge in a way that says what was before laid the foundation and the groundwork and made the sacrifice for what we can be today in this moment right now. which is because of those sacrifices, because of those things that happened before, you now have companies like Dante's Partners, companies like Angel Bruner, right? Companies like H2 that have the ability, companies like Moya that have the ability to go out and manage and do these projects on their own. They have the financial capacity, they have the human capacity, they have the track record to go execute. And so I think that sometimes, although it seems like a logical progression, sometimes it seems revolutionary when you sort of launch that next iteration. And so Legacy Community Partners to me is about building off the history of economic justice, self-sufficiency, and building the next iteration of tapping in to what has been done and the sacrifices made over the years to allow diversity in the development construction space.
Oh, that was great. So before we go, producer Paola, do we have time for 2 questions? All right, so we have a question from Federico Rivera. Why do you think other developers don't think the way you think? You do make money out of your projects, as they do as well. Is it that they don't care? Is it greed? Or is that shareholders that demand more return on their projects?
So I'll say 2 things. I think that the beauty of some of the projects we do is that it's not always that there are certain situations where money and impact are at odds with one another, but there's lots of places where they're not. And I think sometimes people just assume that they are. They don't think about how you can do both in a powerful way. And the other issue is about time. Over my time in DC real estate, I found that I was much more inspired by some of the long-term property owners, folks like the Hornings or even Williams Smith. And I wondered, why are they so much more involved in the community than our merchant builders? Why are they doing all this other work? And it started to dawn on me that when you think about long-term, so time frame defines a lot. So if you think that you're going to be part of a community for decades, then the health and the well-being of that community matters. And it matters not just from a social standpoint, it matters from a financial one, because your asset, the value of your asset is determined by the health of that community. And so I think when a lot of development is short-term thinking, a lot of the way capital is deployed into real estate is short-term thinking. You got a 3-year fund cycle, you got to sell and get out. And when you are operating off of that time frame and that fund cycle, you're actually not aligned with the interest of the community.
Okay, Paola asks, one of the most exciting areas of owning a business is the creative side of strategically building a business. Where do you find the inspiration to be innovative in what you do?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's hard, right? Because the more your business gets going, like the more you get sucked into the stuff, and the stuff just comes up, right? And we all do this in our work. Like we've got all these things going on and we have success. We got a great idea and we start going stuff, like the stuff becomes overwhelming, right? And I think it's critical to have opportunities to step back and to hear from others. And this comes back, I think, to the people you're able to surround yourself with. And I think I've been very lucky to have a number of peers who have inspired me, a number of folks, in generations ahead of us who mentored and taught me, and people to go to kind of shake you out of the whirlwind of the day-to-day and to say, think about it, create the space for it. So, one of the things we've been doing the last few years is 5 of us folks who are working in this space made a commitment every quarter to go away for 2 days and to share ideas and to share strategies. And my wife always makes fun of me because I cherish those. She's like, why are you so committed to this now? Because those 2 days are so they breathe energy and life back into me. And that because they remove me from the space I'm in every day and give me a chance to think about it.
Perfect. Let's wrap it up with two questions that we can knit together. Aiden asks, what's the hardest part of working in redevelopment and area of gentrification? And Carmen Gonzalez Reed asks, how do you engage a community in the development that has been disenfranchised?
Yeah, so in my mind, when we think of gentrification, right, we've kind of set up this idea that redevelopment or development means people are pushed out and people leave. It's not it's not grounded in reality, because the history of American cities is the history of migration, history of people of color in this country, history of migration. People are pushed, those with less are pushed into places that are less desirable. Then maybe that place becomes desirable, others want to move in and they get pushed out, right? But so it has a basis in reality, but it doesn't actually have a basis in some of the demographics in the history of our city. There were many more, like you did the research in Brooklyn, there was 10,000 more people half a mile from my office in 1970 than there are today. Yet we're talking about the space is all getting eaten up. No, there was actually way more people here, right? And so how do we think about development that brings back to life underused infrastructure and assets and space, but that participates people? So what I always say to people is, I've never been in a community where the long-term residents or the people that are at risk of being gentrified don't want their community to be better. It's not that they don't want a new building. It's not that they don't want a new store. It's not that they don't want a new business to come into their community. It's that they're afraid, and oftentimes rightfully so, that that business or that housing or that opportunity will not be for them. That they won't be able to shop in that store. That they will not be able to get a job on that construction site, right? And so in my mind, the question of how you address the issue of gentrification, of how all this is happening, is an issue of how do you address participation? Because ultimately, people want progress, but they want to participate in progress. And they want that progress to create a pathway to opportunity for them, right? And so I believe the ultimate question in the issues of displacement and gentrification, it is not one about should stuff happen, but it's more a question about how do we define who participates in what way and what happens.
Well, thank you very much for your answers. Thank you very much for your time. This has been great, instructive, and you made look 30 minutes like 2 minutes. Really appreciate your comment.
Thank you guys for having me.
You were on fire.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.